works. Okay, so C2, we started last week, right? We talked about the important things that are going to be asked on your quiz. X-intercepts we plug 0 in for Y. Y-intercepts we plug X in, or 0 in for X. And we talked about how to graph something like this and then answer specific questions on it. So finding the X-intercepts, the Y-intercepts, and then finding a value at a specific spot. So that would be something similar to the graphing calculator question that you'll see on the quiz. And we talked about symmetry. If we want to find out if something is symmetric with respect to the x-axis, we plug in a negative y. Y-axis, we plug in a negative x. Origin, we do both, and we see if it goes back to the original or if every term changes.
It says graph the following equation and then include symmetry. Are you going to want us to label the symmetry?
So what it will look like is it will have a question like this, and it will literally say x-intercepts, and then you'll get a line. Y-intercepts, and then you'll get a line. And then it will say x-axis symmetry, yes. No. Y-axis symmetry, I try to make it as foolproof as possible. Yes, and easy for me to grade. No. Origin. Yes. No. And you'll literally circle it, okay? So let's practice that now, okay? So if I wanted to find the x-intercept, what do? Plug what in for what? 0 in for y. So I'm going to say 0 equals absolute value of 2 minus x. And then if I wanted to get rid of the absolute value, typically if there was a number on the other side, right, if that said like 3, I would say that whatever's on the inside equals positive 3 and negative 3, right? But is there such thing as positive or negative 0? No, it's just 0. So I eliminate, and I set it equal to 0, and then I solve. So I can just add the x. And x equals 2 is my y-intercept. So I plug my x-intercept. I plug 0 in for y. And I got 2. You're going to give it to me just like that in coordinate point form. Then when I ask for the y-intercept, you would do what? Make x 0. Good. So I would simplify that. Y equals absolute value of 2, and the absolute value of 2 is 2. So this time I plug 0 in for x. And I got y is 2. All right, then I want to test for symmetry. So I should say, okay, if I'm going to try to test for the x-axis symmetry, what do? Make y negative. So I'm going to make the y a negative y. And then I would check to see if that can be simplified. Is there something there I can simplify? No. Is it equal to the original? No. Did every sign change? No. So this does not have x-axis symmetry. To test for y-axis symmetry, what am I going to do? Make x a negative x. So it's minus a negative x. Minus a negative becomes positive, and I get y equals absolute value of 2 plus x. Does that equal the original? Okay, didn't go back to the original. Didn't go back to the original, and only one sign changed. Every single sign has a change. So it also does not have y-axis symmetry. And then the last test is origin, and for origin we do what? Both the x and the y get replaced with their negative counterpoint, right? So negative y equals absolute value of 2 minus a negative x becomes plus. And again, does not go back to the original. And we got close this time. 2 of the signs changed, but not every single sign. So this is also a no. With me so far? Okay, so now it's going to say graph. And you can use what you already have to graph. And if it's not enough, we're going to plot some extra points. So the only piece of information I have, or 2, is that I have a y-intercept and an x-intercept, both at 2. If you remember from Algebra 2 Honors, from Algebra 2 Honors, what kind of parent function is this? It's an absolute value, and an absolute value graph looks like a V, okay? So I think at least this side's going up, but I also have a negative x. So maybe it's going down, maybe it shifted to the right, maybe it shifted to the left, and maybe you don't remember that stuff, okay? that's when you're going to plug in some extra points. So I would plug in a point to the right of the one I got furthest right, and I'm going to plug in a point to the left of the one I got furthest left. So I'm plugging in 3 and -1. So y equals absolute value of 2 minus a -1. That becomes the absolute value of 3, which is 3. So -1, 3, which is consistent with that line raising up. And on the other side, absolute value of 2 minus 3, absolute value of -1, which is 1, which is consistent with my v looking like that. Yeah.
How do you know, like, it's 3 and -1? Like,
I just did something to the right of what I had for this right and something to the left of what I had for this left. So I could have gone anywhere over here until you know what it looks like-ish. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point. We're going to spend plenty of times on like parent functions and transformations, and if you remember it, this means like this would typically be a shift to the left 2, but because it's a negative here, it's a reflection over the y-axis, which changed that to a shift to the right 2, which matches what we've got. But we have not reviewed that, so I don't expect all of that to be like fresh. So you can always plot points. All right, so first of all, there's no absolute value bar. You have to go into your math menu. So if you go to math, let me go to the first, go to y equals, go to the top. Go to math, and then I arrow to number. The very first thing is ABS, and that stands for absolute value. Now I get the bars, okay? And then I'm going to type 2 minus x. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to hit graph. All right, do you remember how to find zeros and stuff? Yes. Okay, so if I wanted to find a 0, first of all, this one's kind of tricky, but I'll talk about it when it happens. I go second trace, I go to 0, and I'm going to go as close to that part as I can, hit enter, and then I'm going to come to the right of it and hit enter, and it's going to bring you to that 0. So although it didn't cross it, it did hit it and come back up again. So it brings me. That's also a whole number, so I could have found it from my table. Second table. And I'm looking for where y is 0. While I'm here, I also have my y-intercept though, right? Because my x is 0 at 0, 2. You want me to go back to it, Yar? The absolute value? Yeah. You got it? Math, arrow over to number? Okay, good. Yeah.
Can you do the trace part again?
Yep, so I'm going to go to my graph, right? If I want to find a 0 or I want to find a max min, all those things are here, but I go second trace, and I go to 0. X-intercept is the same thing as a 0. So I go there. If I go, I'm going to go left of where it crosses the x-axis. I'm going to go, well, hits the x-axis this time. I'm going to go right of where it hits the x-axis, and then I hit enter again when it says guess, and it's going to bring you to the 0. Okay? Now, let's just practice this. It didn't say it on this question, but let's say it said find y when x equals 2.5. Yes, I know you could plug this in, but the equation won't be this simple on your quiz. So I'm going to go second trace and value this time. And I'm going to type 2.5. And what's the y value when x is 2.5? 0.5. Good. We will eventually get to max, min. We will eventually get to all that stuff. The other thing it's going to ask for is your y-intercept. For that, there are 2 ways to do it, but for now we're going to trace. Okay? I hit trace, and I'm looking for where my x is 0. And look, it doesn't happen perfectly. There it's negative 0.07. There it's positive 0.07. But it goes between 2.07 and 1.92. So the other way to confirm it is that table. Second table. When x is 0, y is, or I could go back to the graph. Second trace, value 0. So when x is 0, my y is 2.
How do you reset your calculator?
Second plus 712. So you, by the time you take this exam, you're going to be a calculator whiz. Like this becomes like a second part of your of nature. But for tomorrow, you need to be able to find zeros and a value when. Okay, those things, and then we'll keep going when we keep. And it will not be something as basic as that, as you can kind of. It's not going to be whole numbers that kind of stuff. You got to know how to find it. All right, we're going to do the next one. So I want you to do it. Let's see how quick we can do it because I'd love to talk about your quiz. X-intercepts, Y-intercepts, symmetry. And then we'll graph it. So this one, I just did the work, but then I will graph it, okay? I did the X-intercept, plug 0 in for Y. You should have gotten plus and minus 2. Y-intercept, plug 0 in for X, you get 4. Then for the x-axis symmetry, you're plugging in a negative y. It doesn't equal the original, only the y changed signs. So it does not have x-axis symmetry. Y-axis, I plug a negative in. When it goes in, that negative x goes in parentheses, and the exponent is squared, which means it's going to make the negative become a positive. This went back to the original. If it goes back to the original, then it's a yes. So this does have y-axis symmetry. And then the origin, we changed the y, and we changed the x. The y changed signs, the 4 and the x did not. So it fails the origin symmetry. So now I'm going to graph the things I know. I've got an x-intercept at negative 2, n positive 2. And I've got a y-intercept at 4. If you remember from algebra 2, this is squared. That means it's a parabola, right? And if there's a negative on front, what does that do? Flips it upside down. So this is consistent with what we drew. If you're confident in those skills, then you don't even need to apply any extra points. You would know what this overall shape looks like. If you're unsure, that's when you need to plot some extra points. So if you've got, and only if there's time. Like if you've got time, you feel like you've got a little bit of time at the end and you want to double check, I would plug in 3 and I would plug in negative 3 and I would see what those points were and it would confirm the overall shape. Yeah.
Specifically 3 negative 3?
Well, just one to the right and one to the left. It doesn't matter which ones.
I just do 1?
Yeah. You won't get it. If you do 1, you're confirming these up here, which is fine. 3 would make it continue outside, but it doesn't matter.
Oh.
Yeah, you're just confirming your shape. Okay, then the last one was example 6. Okay, my x-intercept is negative 2, 0. My y-intercept is 0 and square root 2. So if this is on, which this kind of question would be on the part that you don't have a calculator with, then when you write your answer, you're going to keep it exact for me. So you're literally going to keep it as 0 square root 2. But when I go to plot that on the graph, I got to approximate it, right? Root 2 is close to root 1, which is square root is 1. So I'm going to say maybe it's a 1.2. It could be a 1.1. It could be 1.3. It doesn't matter. You're approximating. And then when I graph it, so I'll plot those 2 points, negative 2, 0, and 0, 1.2-ish, something like that. I go to my x-axis symmetry. I plugged in the negative y changed, nothing else, so this is a no. I plug in a negative x, the x changed sign, nothing else, so this is a no. I plugged in the y and the x, and those two changed, but the 2 did not, so this is also a no. If, again, you remember your parent functions, that square root has that arc to it. So if I'm really confident, I'm good. If I'm not confident, then I'm going to plug in another number. Maybe I pick 2 this time. Something to the right. And I would get y equals the square root of 2 plus 2, square root 4, which is 2. Confirming this point. And if I plugged in something to the left, like negative 3, y equals the square root of negative 3 plus 2. I get the square root of negative 1, which can't be graphed. So it confirms that my graph starts at that negative 2. Questions? Yeah.
So we're just keeping it exact for the answers. So we're not.
You would keep it exact for, well, I mean, that's really all you're answering right now. But yes, you would keep it exact if you didn't have the calculator.
And like for the questions where it's like, oh, plug in the value and it's not like it's like a long decimal.
Yep.
Rounding to like.
Always 3 decimal places. Yep. So let's say, because let's find that y-intercept using your graphing calculator. So I'm going to go to y equals, I'm going to go to the square root of x plus 2. And I'm going to graph it. Okay, so I'm graphed, okay? To find the 0, I would go second trace, go to 0. I'm going to go left. Now this time what happens when I end this graph is even though there's not a line there, if I hit left, it actually lets you go left. Hit left, hit right, hit enter. It's going to take me to the -2. There's my 0. Y-intercept, I'm going to go second trace value. X is 0. There's my y-intercept, which is 1.4. So that 1.4 would be like our approximation of the square root of 2. And then if I wanted to find, again, say like find y when x equals 3.5, I go second trace value 3.5, and I get 2.3452, and we're going to keep 3 decimal places, 2.345. All right, your quiz review, okay? This is what it looks like. I post the keys for the review, so I'm not collecting this. I don't need you to just rewrite everything that I posted and then turn it in. That's stupid. Hopefully you need to realize that, like, you're smart enough to know if I don't do a quiz review, it's probably bad setup leading into a quiz, right? But having said that, it doesn't mean, like, if you're super confident, if this is like what you're really strong in, then maybe do one and you don't need to do them all. I don't care what you do. You have to be okay with what you do, okay? Especially because this is on top of C.2 homework. That typically will not happen. I typically will not give you a homework and a quiz review on the same day. Well, we kind of lost Friday because of math, so that's why it doubled up, okay? Normally, they would be 2 separate days, and I would say do the whole quiz review. But a lot of this will overlap with what we did in C2, so you have to figure out what you need to do, okay? So all of the front page, no calc. That's on the non-calc section. All of the second page until you get to here, non-calc. Then on the bottom, it says, use your graphing utility to graph the given equation, answer the questions. And it says round your answer to the nearest tenth. We're going to go to 3 decimal places because that's what you're always going to do throughout the whole year. So we're just going to keep it consistent, okay? That's what your AP exam is going to do. So on this is mostly like the C1. The circles, finding the equation of a circle that passes through a point and a line. I mean, the center and the point. Find the equation of a circle that passes through the endpoints of the diameter. And then your scatter plot. And notice it says make an inference about the data. So remember, we're saying as something increases or decreases, the other thing is increasing and decreasing. I would say that part is not hard, but people lose stupid points because they don't use the right words or they don't label their scatter plot. Like, don't do that. That's silly, okay? Get used to being able to write words in math. It's part of AP prep. Okay, so tomorrow when you come in, I'll answer a couple questions on this in the beginning, and then you'll take your quiz. So if you've got questions, you're welcome to ask at the beginning. It doesn't mean I can do the whole quiz review. We will lose time. But I can answer any kind of questions that you've got. We good? Yeah? Okay.